For over 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire stretched across 3 continents, governing millions of subjects from the gates of Vienna to the shores of Yemen. It was a civilization of remarkable achievements, architectural marvels, literary masterpieces, scientific advances. But within the grandeur of palace walls lay a darker reality, one that history has often relegated to whispers. The Ottoman system of slavery was not simply economic exploitation, it was a complex institution that touched every aspect of society, including the most intimate and brutal forms of human bondage. The Devshirme system, established in the 14th century, forcibly recruited Christian children from the Balkans and Anatolia. While many became janissaries, the empire's elite soldiers, others faced a different fate. Young girls, particularly those considered beautiful, were often selected not for military service, but for the imperial harem and the households of wealthy Ottoman officials. This was not a choice. This was systematic abduction. The word harem itself derives from the Arabic haram, meaning forbidden or sacred, but for the thousands of women confined within these walls, it represented a prison of silk and gold. These were girls, often between the ages of 12 and 16, taken from their families, stripped of their names, their languages, their identities. They were property. The imperial harem at Topkapi Palace housed as many as 1,200 women at its peak. They were ranked in a rigid hierarchy, from the lowliest servants to the sultan's favored consorts. The Ottoman records are quite clinical about this. Women were catalogued like inventory, their physical attributes, their origins, their purchase prices meticulously recorded. It's a bureaucracy of human trafficking. The Valid Sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan, ruled this world of women with absolute authority. She determined who would share the sultan's bed, who would bear his children, and who would remain in servitude. Those who bore sons to the sultan gained status, but this came at an unimaginable cost. They had been torn from their families, forced into relationships they could not refuse, bearing children who might one day order their deaths if succession politics demanded it. Beyond the imperial harem, wealthy Ottoman households maintained their own collections of enslaved women. The practice was so normalized that Islamic law developed elaborate rules governing sexual access to female slaves. What we're documenting here is rape as institution. These women had no legal recourse, no means of escape. If they became pregnant, the children were raised as Muslims, further severing connections to their origins. The human cost extended far beyond individual suffering. Entire communities in the Caucasus, Balkans, and along the Black Sea coast lived in terror of slave raids. Crimean Tatar raids alone are estimated to have enslaved over 1 million people between 1450 and 1700. Women and children were particularly prized in the markets of Istanbul, Damascus, and Cairo. The slave markets of the Ottoman Empire were vast commercial enterprises. The Beresten in Istanbul, the markets in Kaffa and Trabzon. These were centers of human trade that operated openly for centuries. European travelers wrote detailed accounts of these markets. They describe young women being examined like livestock, their teeth checked, their bodies inspected by potential buyers. It's documentation that's difficult to read, but necessary to understand. Some women found ways to navigate this system, gaining influence through intelligence and political acumen. But their success stories should not obscure the fundamental injustice of their situation. We cannot romanticize the harem. Yes, some women gained power, but it was power exercised within a system that had already stripped them of their fundamental humanity and freedom of choice. The practice began to decline in the 19th century as the Ottoman Empire modernized and faced pressure from European powers who had largely abolished slavery in their own territories. The abolition was gradual and incomplete. The last slaves in the Ottoman Empire were not freed until the early 20th century, and even then, many had nowhere to go. They had been cut off from their origins for so long that freedom became another form of displacement. Today, the palaces stand as museums, their beauty preserved for tourists who marvel at Ottoman craftsmanship. The voices of the enslaved women who lived and died within these walls remained largely silent in the official narratives. We owe it to their memory to tell these stories honestly, not to diminish the achievements of Ottoman civilization, but to acknowledge the full cost of that civilization, the human lives that were sacrificed on the altar of imperial power. The legacy of Ottoman sexual slavery reminds us that great civilizations can commit great evils, that architectural beauty can mask human suffering, and that the price of empire is often paid by those whose names we will never know. These women were mothers, daughters, sisters. They had dreams, hopes, talents. They deserve to be remembered not just as victims, but as human beings whose lives mattered, whose suffering mattered, whose stories matter. In remembering them, we confront uncomfortable truths about power, about exploitation, about the ways societies can normalize the unthinkable. Their silence should not be our silence.